The 911 operator thought the caller was confused. The man sounded shaken, but his words did not make sense at first. He said he was riding his bicycle when he noticed movement near the edge of the road. Something crawling, something small. As he got closer, the truth became impossible to ignore. It was a child, a 12-year-old girl, covered in blood, dragging herself out of the woods with what little strength she had left. The caller said she had been stabbed, repeatedly. He did not know how many times, only that there was blood everywhere. It was the morning of May 31st, 2014, a quiet suburban area where parents felt safe letting their children walk alone. Clean streets, trimmed lawns, a place where violent crime felt distant, like something that happened somewhere else. Paramedics and police rushed to the scene expecting chaos, maybe a freak accident, maybe a wild animal attack. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their careers. The girl's name was Peyton. She had been stabbed 19 times. One wound narrowly missed her heart, another punctured a major artery. Her lungs had collapsed, her organs were damaged. Medical professionals would later say that survival under those conditions was almost impossible. But Peyton was alive. Somehow, she had refused to die. After being left alone in the dirt, bleeding and terrified, she stood up. She collapsed. She crawled. Every movement drained more blood from her body. But she kept going until someone finally saw her. As Peyton was rushed into emergency surgery, investigators were left with a question that made no sense. Who would do this to a child? The answer would unravel every assumption they had. This was not a random attack, not a stranger, not an adult. The people responsible were Peyton's closest friends, two girls she trusted completely, two girls who had slept over at her house the night before, two girls who laughed with her, played games with her, and shared food with her. Within hours, police located the suspects walking calmly along a nearby highway. They were not hiding, they were not panicking, they were carrying a backpack. Inside it was the knife used in the attack. When officers questioned them, the girls did not deny what they had done. They did not cry, they did not show fear. They said it was necessary. That word immediately alarmed investigators. Necessary meant planning. Necessary meant belief. Necessary meant this was not a crime of emotion, but a crime of purpose. As detectives prepared to question the girls, it became clear this case was not about violence alone. It was about something far more unsettling. A belief system formed online, reinforced over time. A story meant to be fiction that became reality in the minds of children. And once fiction became real, murder became a requirement. The sleepover was not innocent. It was calculated. Months before the attack, the girls had already decided someone had to die. In their minds, this was not cruelty, it was obligation. They believed they were being tested. They believed failure would mean death for their families. The sleepover gave them the perfect opportunity: access, privacy, and trust. That night looked normal to any adult. Pizza boxes, games, laughter echoing through the house. Nothing that would raise alarm. No signs of fear or tension. Just children celebrating a birthday together. But beneath that normalcy, a decision had already been made. The victim did not know she had been chosen. The next morning began like any other. Breakfast at the table, playing upstairs, joking, laughing. Then they suggested going to the park. Peyton agreed without hesitation. Why would she not? These were her friends. At the park, they played on the equipment and sang songs. Everything appeared harmless. Then one of them suggested a walk, just a short one, to explore, to look at trees. They did not venture deep into the forest. They stopped near a small cluster of trees close to the road, close enough to hear traffic, far enough to be unseen. That choice was deliberate. Without warning, the attack began. One girl tackled Peyton from behind, forcing her to the ground. The other pulled the knife from the backpack. Peyton screamed. She fought. She begged. The knife came down again and again, 19 times. There was no hesitation, no panic, just action. When it was over, Peyton lay bleeding, unable to stand. She looked up at the people she trusted most and said something investigators would later describe as heartbreaking. She said she trusted them. The girls told her they were going to get help. They lied. They walked away, believing she would die. What they did not expect was resistance. Peyton refused to surrender. With catastrophic injuries, she stood, she fell, she crawled. Every inch forward was agony. But she kept moving. Eventually, she reached the road. That single act exposed everything. Inside the interrogation room, detectives made a deliberate choice. They did not confront her. They did not accuse her. They did not even mention the word stabbing at first. Instead, they spoke softly and patiently. They asked about school, about birthdays, about favorite foods, about television shows, and costumes. The room felt less like a police station and more like a counselor's office. For nearly 15 minutes, the girl sitting across from them was not treated as a suspect in an attempted murder, but as an ordinary 12-year-old child. This was intentional. Investigators knew that pushing too hard, too fast, would shut her down. What they did not anticipate was how easily she would talk once the conversation shifted. When the detective finally asked why she might be there, her response came without hesitation. Her voice did not shake. Her breathing did not change. She explained that they had stabbed Peyton. She did not lower her eyes. She did not search for words. She said it had been planned. She said it was necessary. That word returned again, delivered with unsettling certainty. Necessary. When asked to explain why, she described a tall, faceless figure she believed was real, a being she believed lived in the woods, a being she believed watched them. She said this figure could kill her family if she disobeyed. In her mind, this was not a possibility. It was a certainty. She explained that murder was not an act of hatred, but an obligation, a test, a requirement to prove loyalty. She spoke as if she were explaining a rule from a game, not the attempted killing of her best friend. There was no emotional weight in her words, no visible internal conflict. When detectives asked how she felt afterward, she said she felt nothing. She said remorse would get her nowhere. She said emotions did not change outcomes. Her tone remained calm, almost analytical. As the interview continued, investigators realized they were witnessing something far more complex than simple manipulation or immaturity. The girl described online horror stories as if they were historical records. She referenced fictional characters as if they were real entities with established rules, expectations, and punishments. In her mind, these stories were not entertainment. They were warnings. She believed she would be rewarded for obedience. She believed she would be protected afterward. She even described a future in which she would be safe and accepted somewhere far away, as if the act of violence was merely a step toward a better life. Detectives recognized the signs of a shared delusion, not something that formed overnight, but something built slowly, reinforced through constant discussion, reinforced through isolation from adults, reinforced through unmonitored internet content that fed fear instead of grounding. When asked what she thought would happen after the attack, she said she assumed she would be arrested eventually, because everything catches up to you. That statement was delivered with the same calm certainty as everything else she said. The logic was chilling. In her mind, consequences were inevitable, but irrelevant. The mission came first. By the time the interview ended, seasoned investigators sat in silence. They were not disturbed by rage or cruelty. They were disturbed by certainty, by the realization that this child truly believed murder was required, and that belief had erased the boundary between fantasy and reality completely. Peyton survived, and that single fact reshaped the entire case. Surgeons worked for hours to save her life. Doctors later described her survival as extraordinary. One wound had narrowly missed her heart. Another had damaged vital organs. Blood loss alone should have been fatal. Yet she lived. Her recovery was long and painful. Physical healing took years. Psychological healing would take far longer. She lost her sense of safety, her trust, and her childhood in one morning. The people she believed would protect her had tried to kill her. The legal system now faced a challenge few courts were prepared for. The attackers were children. Their crime was violent, premeditated, and nearly fatal. Psychological evaluations revealed severe mental disturbances. One of the girls was found not criminally responsible due to mental illness and was committed to a psychiatric institution with no predetermined release date. Her confinement was based not on punishment, but on treatment and public safety. The other accepted a plea agreement and was sentenced to decades of psychiatric supervision within the juvenile system. Neither case followed a traditional path. As news of the crime spread, the public reaction was intense. Fear dominated headlines. Parents questioned how something like this could happen without warning. Schools reviewed their policies. Mental health professionals debated responsibility. Could internet horror content influence children this deeply? Where does accountability begin and end? Was this a failure of parenting, of education, of digital platforms, or of early mental health intervention? There were no simple answers. Experts studying the case identified several contributing factors: shared psychosis, social isolation, reinforcement through friendship, a lack of adult awareness, online spaces where fear-based narratives went unchecked. None of these alone explained the crime. Together they formed a perfect storm. This was not about a fictional monster coming to life. It was about how belief can become absolute when left unchallenged, how trust can be manipulated, how a child's need for belonging can override morality. Years later, the case remains a reference point in discussions about internet influence, juvenile crime, and mental health. Not because of the character that inspired it, but because of what it revealed about vulnerability. What happened in those woods was not random. It was not impulsive. It was planned, justified, and executed by children who genuinely believed they had no other choice. That is what makes this case unforgettable. Not the horror story they believed in, but the terrifying realization that belief alone, when reinforced and unchallenged, can turn friendship into a weapon.